Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the Merciful, the Compassionate. Prior to announcing the agenda for this evening program, on behalf of the MSA Muslim Student Association Persian Speaking Group, I would like to welcome each and every one of you to this evening program. I do trust that this program will benefit you and each one of you. The presentation will begin with recitation of Holy Quran in its English translation for about 15 minutes, followed by the introduction of tonight's speaker. After the speech, which the topic will be redefining Persian Gulf crisis, you have ample amount of time for question and answer from the speakers. Now I'd like to begin our program with reciting some verses from Quran and then translate it. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى أولياء بعضهم أولياء بعض ومن يتولهم منكم فإنه منهم إن الله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين فترى الذين في قلوبهم مرض يصارعون فيهم يقولون نخشى أن تصيبنا دائرة فعسى الله أن يأتي بالفتح أو أمر من عنده فيصبحوا على ما أسروا في أنفسهم نادمين ويقول الذين آمنوا أهؤلاء الذين أقسموا بالله جهد أيمانهم إنهم لمعكم حبطت أعمالهم فأصبحوا خاسرين يا أيها الذين آمنوا من يرتد منكم عن دينه فسوف يأتي الله بقوم يحبهم ويحبونه أذلة على المؤمنين أعزة على الكافرين يجاهدون في سبيل الله ولا يخافون لومة لائم ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله واسع عليم إنما وليكم الله ورسوله والذين آمنوا الذين يقيمون الصلاة ويؤتون الزكاة وهم راكعون ومن يتول الله ورسوله والذين آمنوا فإن حزب الله هم الغالبون يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا الذين اتخذوا دينكم هزوا ولعبا من الذين أوتوا الكتاب من قبلكم والكفار أولياء واتقوا الله إن كنتم مؤمنين وإذ ناديتم إلى الصلاة اتخذوها هزوا ولعبا ذلك بأنهم قوم لا يعقلون قل يا أهل الكتاب هل تنقمون منا إلا أن آمنا بالله وما أنزل إلينا وما أنزل من قبل وأن أكثركم فاسقون. قل هل أنبئكم بشر من ذلك مثوبة عند الله قل هل أنبئكم بشر من ذلك مثوبة عند الله من لعنه الله وغضب عليه وجعل منهم القردة والخنازير وعبد الطاغوت أولئك شر مكانا وأضل عن سواء السبيل. وإذا جاءوكم قالوا آمنا وقد دخلوا بالكفر وهم قد خرجوا به والله أعلم بما كانوا يكتمون. وترى كثيرا منهم يسارعون في الإثم والعدوان وأكلهم السحت لبئس ما كانوا يعملون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. And now translation of these verses. O you who believe, do not take the Jews and the Christians for ally. They are allies of each other, and whoever amongst you takes them for an ally, then surely he is one of them. Surely Allah does not guide the unjust people. But you will see those in whose hearts is a disease, hastening towards them, saying, we fear lest a calamity should befall us. But it may be that Allah will bring the victory or punishment from Himself, so that they shall be regretting on account of what they hide in their souls. And those who believe will say, are these they who swear by Allah with the most forcible of their oaths that they were most surely with you? Their deeds shall go for nothing, so they shall become losers. O you who believe, whoever from among you turns back from his religion, then Allah will bring a people, He shall love them and they shall love Him, lowly before the believers, mighty against the unbelievers. They shall strive hard in Allah's way and shall not fear the censure of any sincerer. This is Allah's grace. He gives it to whom He pleases, and Allah is ample given knowing. Only Allah is your valley and His apostle. Only Allah is your valley and His apostle. And those who believe, those who keep up prayers and pay the poor rate while they bow. And whoever takes Allah and His apostle and those who believe for a guardian, then surely the party of Allah are they that shall be triumphed. Oh, you who believe, do not take for guardians those who take your religion for a mockery and a joke. From among those who were given the book before you and the unbelievers, and be careful of your duty to Allah if you are believers. And when you call to prayer, they make it a mockery and a joke. This is because they are a people who don't understand. Say, O followers of the book, do you find fault with us except that we believe in Allah and in what has been revealed to us and what was revealed before, and that most of you are transgressors? Say, shall I inform you of him who is worse than this in retribution from Allah? Worse is he whom Allah has cursed and brought his wrath upon, and of whom he made apes and swine. And he who served the shaitan, these are worse in place and more erring from the straight path. And when they come to you, they say, we believe, and indeed they come in with unbelief, and indeed they go forth with it. And Allah knows best what they concealed. And you will see many of them striving with one another to hasten in sin and exceeding the limits, and their eating of what is unlawfully acquired. Certainly evil is that which they do. Now, the next portion of our program is the speech of Brother Al-Asi. Among other qualifications that Brother Imam Al-Asi has is that he is the current Imam and Director of Islamic Education Center in Washington, in Maryland, the only elected Imam of the National Islamic Center in Washington, D.C., conveyor of the Islamic trend in North America, author and translator, lectured extensively on Islam in the contemporary world, lectures presented on numerous North America campus, plus overseas presentation in England, Germany, South Africa, the Middle East, and North America. Before I ask him to come to the podium, I'd like to let you know that after his presentation, you have ample amount of time to ask any question from him. It could be orally, or if you prefer, it could be written. In order for you to be able to ask him in written, some of the brother will pass pieces of papers, so you write down your question, and then at the end we shall pick it up. Now I'd like to ask Dr. Brother Al-Asi to come forth and present his speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, I greet you with the greeting of Islam. Customarily, we say, peace and blessings be upon you.
Could you speak more directly into the microphone, please?
I'll try, yes, sure. If you didn't hear my greeting, I'll repeat it. I said, peace and blessings be to you all this evening. It's the customary way of Muslims greeting themselves. We have at issue something called the Persian Gulf crisis. We also have a way of presenting this crisis to the general public. That's something you are all familiar with, I hope and I think, during the course of the 2.5 months and more that we've been living through it. what I will try to do this evening, and I hope that most of you have enough information, you have the schema that is necessary to place what is going to be said within context. Now, occasionally it happens that some people don't have that much information on the subject. And if that's going to be the case, sometimes the speaker is misunderstood or selectively listened to. And that is why we're going to have, I hope, a question and answer session, which you are free to present your comment or comments and the questions that you have concerning this issue. I would like to begin with those years prior to the 2nd of August 1990, when we have the military forces going into action, because there's more to it than just sending the militaries out there to stand against each other, which we have in process today. First of all, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that the world into which this Persian Gulf crisis came into existence is a world in which there's one uncontested superpower that more or less calls the shots in the international forums. And that's after the Soviet Union went limping off the international stage. And that superpower is common sense, in a common sense expression, the United States of America. But before the position of the United States of America on August 2nd and thereafter, the United States of America in its previous administrations, the end of the Democratic administration of President Carter through the Republican administration of President Reagan, continued with the Republican administration of the present President of the United States, George Bush. All of these administrations had, and continue to have, a policy that leads their decision-making in the area, which I will try to fill in, precipitated what we have as a problem that seems unsolvable up until this moment. The administrations that we're talking about, beginning in 1978, we don't want to trail this issue in any deeper sense, but we'll take 1978 as a rough year to begin. Up until 1990, the American administrations maintained a policy of not recognizing a growing element in the landscape of the Middle East. And that growing element or factor is the Islamic one, which stands for the character, the identity, the futuristic outlook, the aspirations, the expectations, the hopes, the frustrations, the failures of the peoples who live in that part of the world. It has been a point of United States foreign policy not to recognize this factor in the area, not to recognize it in Afghanistan, not to recognize it in Iran, and not to recognize it in the burgeoning underground that extends all the way from Southeast Asia through the Middle East and on to Western Africa. Now, this deliberate position taken by the United States and interpreted by the peoples in those lands does not bode well for the future. Specifically speaking, during the war that began in 1980 between the government in Iraq, which launched a war of aggression against a budding experiment of Islamic self-determination in the adjacent land of Iran, the position of the United States government was very clear throughout all of those years. And that was the unqualified support for the Iraqi government in its military aggression against a neighboring, independent, sovereign state belonging to all international bodies. The United States could not find it within its tolerance level to accept an internal affair taking place within that independent and sovereign state, and it had to interfere indirectly by way of proxy or agent administrations in the Middle East and occupying the frontline positions were the governments that are today directly threatened with military action should a war break out, namely Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the statelets in the Gulf, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman. These formulated a common front that was engaged in a war against a newly established administration in Iran. Because of that, because there was a quote-unquote Islamic threat emanating by people who only wanted self-determination for their future generations, all types of weapons technology, weapons industries were given without any question to those who are ruling in Baghdad. It was the perceived threat of this Islamic self-determination breaking out in the area that forced not only the United States, but also the European countries and the Soviet Union to take a position of supporting the Iraqi government in such a manner. And hence you had chemical warfare industry mushroom throughout Iraq. You had the Iraqis almost free to import any types of chemical technology from such states as Germany, France, and the rest of these European countries, with the acquiescence, of course, and the green light from the United States. That probably accumulated with Secretary of State George Shultz hopping around the world in an effort to clamp a type of blockade against the Islamic Republic in Iran, and to offer all such types of credits, agriculture, industrial, and otherwise, to the rulers in Baghdad. So what has been growing throughout the years was a disproportionate military buildup inside of Iraq. And I mean disproportionate to the states that are surrounding it. If you wanted to take a look at the military buildup in Iraq, France in recent years sent to Iraq 800 Exocet missiles in its fear of people in the area wanting self-determination. The chemical technology, the chemical weapons technology that has been assembled in Iraq is truly having a frightening impact on the surrounding states. Nowadays, I don't know if anyone of you was watching the news last night, the Soviet Union, its big transport planes, were landing in Saudi Arabia to unload, I don't know how many reports say over 1 million masks that will protect against a chemical attack. The Israelis also have begun to distribute chemical masks to their Jewish population. Palestinian population seems like they have to buy their masks if the masks are available to them. The chemical warfare, and then the delivery system, the ballistic missiles that were enhanced with the convergence of technicians from as far away as Argentina and as close as Egypt. This delivery system was put in place during the 8 years of war against the Islamic Republic of Iran. In other words, a military monstrosity was building up inside of Iraq with the authorization and endorsement of all these United States administrations, including the present one. Not only were these weapons being brought in to Iraq, they were also used against the own Iraqi citizens and subjects of that state. Not much was heard about that. There may have been a couple of correspondents who felt guilty not to report it, and they dispatched their reports. There may have been a couple of editors around who felt that something should be said about that, and so they mentioned in a passing manner a chemical massacre in the northern city of Iraq called Halabja, in which the victims were Iraqi Kurdish citizens. But that didn't bother. No one cared very much about that at the time. It only occurred about 2.5 years ago. It wasn't more than that. Now there is a threat of the use of chemical weapons against military targets. The same militaries that represent the leaders and the decision makers and policy formulators who authorized Iraq to have that capability. And then there's a big fuss about the whole issue. You tend to wonder, are Kuwaiti lives more valuable than Kurdish lives? Is there a difference between one human being and the other? Or Kuwait is very significant and important because it has a lot of wealth and a lot of oil, and the Kurds don't have that. Which would lead us to one of the issues that brought the whole cumulative effect of the past years to the fore on August 2nd. And let me present this point of view to you, and maybe the days in the future will prove its validity more than the type of information that you have right now for it. What I say to you in this perspective is that the same way there was a military, muscular buildup of the Iraqi government, there was a diminishing Iraqi economic feature to it also. The war was launched with an Iraqi reserve of over $35 billion. The war ended after 8 and a fraction of a year, with Iraq having a debt of somewhere between 80 and $120 billion, depending on what sources you are reading. We don't have a pinpointed figure as far as the debt that Iraq has accumulated throughout these years. Now there's a contradiction in being. How can you be militarily strong out of proportion with the rest of the states in the area, Syria, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iran, etc., but then at the same time be, in the economic sense, one of the weakest states in the area. Here is where the Iraqi rulers found themselves in a dilemma. What are they going to do when the bill is up for payment? So the creditors came to collect. It is not perchance that the creditors came to Baghdad to collect their money within these types of circumstances. The Soviet Union and the United States have agreed on certain issues between them. And one of the agreements was that there should be a Jewish immigration from the Soviet Union to occupied Palestine. And that is projected to be about 3 million in the coming 10 years. And for those of you who have rudimentary information about the makeup of Palestine, or whatever your political preference is, some may call it Israel, there's no way that that piece of land is going to accommodate 3 million people. Just impossible. Hence, there has to be some type of arrangement that would provide the Israelis with the military justification to expand their frontiers. And so the creditors went to Baghdad, and I hope we know where the money is in this world. The creditors went to Baghdad and they asked for their money back. They financed this war throughout these years, and it is their right to ask for these debts to be paid. Now this guy in Baghdad, the ruler Saddam Hussein, he looks around, he says, well, you guys know what I have and what I don't have. You know what I can pay back, and you know what I can't pay back. What are you talking about here? They said, we don't care, we want our money. He looks around and it's tempting. You have a few statelets in the Persian Gulf area that really don't have any defenses, although they invested a lot of money in defense programs. Saudi Arabia during the past 10 years has spent well over $60 billion for its defense projects, for its defense capabilities. A lot of money was invested by Kuwait and the Emirates and the rest of these Persian Gulf states. But they were not really strong. They were fragile and vulnerable, because the army that Saddam Hussein has been through 8 years of war. It's an army that has its experience in warfare. These armies never went into active duty. It was very tempting, and the person, in order to pay back the 100 billion or so that he owes his creditors, found that the only way he's able to do that is to grab those oil fields in the south. And it wasn't a simple matter of not having the justification for doing so. He was sending out signals in previous months to both Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, saying to them, don't overproduce. They were producing more than their quota that was agreed upon in OPEC. But they weren't listening. They could care less about what he's saying because he owes them money. They thought that they were in a superior position beyond his reach. It turned out he wasn't bluffing. He meant what he said, and he moved in his armies, his armed forces. He moved them into Kuwait on August 2nd, which brought about the present types of military reactions to that. And in doing so, he also touched on a sensitive undercurrent in the psyche of the people in the area. And that is, they never recognized the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The gentlemen, foreign ministers of Britain and France, who sat together after the World War and said, wait a minute, let's carve out this area. The sick Ottoman Empire has expired, and so we have to have these states So they made something called Iraq and something else called Kuwait. And these Persian Gulf states are nothing but oil fields with a flag over them. That's all they amounted to. Very weak, very vulnerable, but nevertheless, given the type of legitimacy that never came from within, but always came from without. They were the creatures or the creation of European powers. So when this person went and declared that Kuwait has become, for once and for all and forever, a part of Iraq, that was favorably received by the different subjects, the different citizens throughout the Middle East, the other Arab peoples in the area, who thought that it might not have been the best method to do it, but nevertheless, it is a step in the right direction of getting rid of these artificial boundaries and frontiers that have been imposed on them for decades and for generations. And we had a puzzling realignment of states in the area. Syria, that is supposed to be on the terrorist list, the State Department has a list of terrorist nations, nations that support terrorism. Syria is one of them. We had Secretary of State Baker going to Damascus and virtually offering the goodies to the Syrian government if it decides to take a position against the Iraqi government and place its forces in the Arabian Peninsula, which the Syrian government agreed to. The payoffs are beginning to come in. Yesterday, you probably heard in the news, one of the Christian leaders in Lebanon, Danny Shamaoun, him, his wife, his children were shot, Lebanese style, in their apartment in Beirut, one of the payoffs for the American-Syrian agreement. Also, it has been reported that the president of Syria himself and probably a couple of other of his relatives were given $800 million, offered $800 million to go along with the Pax Americana in the area, which was agreed upon, and probably those are also being funneled right now through the appropriate financial channels to wind up the possession of those leaders who are governors of a state that is still on the terrorist list of the State Department here in the United States. And then those who were close to the United States, the King of Jordan, King Hussein, who was long considered to be, and it's no secret, he was on the pay list of the Central Intelligence Agency, but right now he has made a volte-face, an about-face, and has aligned himself solidly with the butcher of Baghdad. Now I was at this university a few years ago. We were speaking about the same war. There was a war there in the area, people. I don't know, I can't tell, because in audiences when you have 50 or 100 or 150 people, you can't tell the faces. But I can say with some certainty, if any of you were around 3 or 4 years ago, I don't think the same faces that are here tonight were the ones who were here 3 or 4 years ago, although it had to do with the same person. That was Saddam Hussein, who was involved in a war who we were speaking against 3 or 4 years ago. There was not that much interest in the guy. Why? Because he was on the American side of the equation. But now that he turned and became on the opposite side of this equation, at least in a surface sense, anti-American, then there's a lot of interest in him. I say in some candidness that I don't think the person is really anti-American. If the American policy is going to be dictated by Zionist interests, which happens to be the case of all U.S. decisions in the Middle East, simply a matter of carrying out the orders to serve the fulfillment of the desires and the policies and the strategies of the State of Israel. That hasn't changed, and I don't think it can be changed even within the rubric of a complicated crisis where ample opportunities are offered for a reassessment of the policies of the United States in the area. That has not been done, and I don't think it will be done. Charging the Middle East with the atmospherics of war within the context of the circumstances and conditions of our days only serves the purposes of further Israeli expansionism and enlisting, further yet, the United States in the support of the Israelis in a blind fashion. The Israelis need the atmospherics of war. They need a demagogue like the ruler of Baghdad to come along and say he's going to use his chemical weapons. He's going to throw his biological weapons and, according to his own words, burn half of Israel. If the Israelis are going to use any type of aggressive, or I guess he used the word nuclear attack against Iraq. Now, someone in his right mind should know that all the chemical plants that are in place in Iraq, the armed forces and the state apparatus of Iraq that was set up by the KGB and Eastern European governments, you can't convince someone in his right mind that they meaning those who are opposed to Iraq, whether they are the Americans, the Israelis, the Soviet Union, or the rest of the forces in the area, do not know when these military instruments are going to become operational. The United States has 5 satellites in orbit over Iraq. They are monitoring all sorts of communications, military and civilian traffic in and out of Iraq. Charging, when these are the diameters of the issue, charging the atmosphere with a climate of war only serves those who have the upper hand in a military sense. And when you come and look at the area, the Iraqis, the Saudi Arabians, the Kuwaitis, the Jordanians, the Syrians, the Egyptians, the Israelis, only to name some of them, when you come and look at their strengths, you can easily conclude that the Israelis, if it's a matter of one military establishment against the other, can take care of themselves very beautifully. They can expand exactly the way they want to. They can go for the sources of water that are vital for bringing in and settling people who are arriving at the rate of 500 immigrants each day. That's a large amount of people who are coming from a faraway land, settling into an area that is supposed to be, the West Bank and Gaza are supposed to be off limits, although a few days ago Sharon said, or another minister in the Israeli government said, no, that's not going to be the case. We are going to go ahead and settle in those areas after they got the $400 million from the United States administration, which the United States was balking at, using the excuse of the Gulf crisis and not using the excuse of the Gulf crisis and avoiding the linkage issue between the Gulf crisis and what is called the Arab-Israeli dispute. They're going ahead and doing it. Talking about United Nations resolutions. You have United Nations resolutions taken against the Israelis, a consensus in the Security Council at the United Nations against the Israelis. When the Israelis annexed Jerusalem, when the Israelis annexed the Golan Heights, when they went ahead and established settlements on the West Bank and Gaza. But who could recall these types of consensus at the United Nations Security Council? Then all of a sudden the United Nations Security Council is whipped up into a consensus fashion against the Iraqi move into Kuwait, and all the world is one orchestra. This is hypocritical in the eyes of the peoples in the area. It is very hypocritical. It's the epitome of duplicity when the United States gives more credit to one Security Council resolution than it gives to another, and virtually camouflages itself with the United Nations to go ahead with the creation of storms of a military atmosphere in the area. 10 days ago or a couple of weeks ago, there was a massacre in one of the most holy of holy places to all believers, Jews, Christians, or Muslims. The Temple Mount, or Mount Moriah, or Al-Haram al-Sharif. 21 worshippers of the Islamic faith were gunned down at close range, in cold blood, by the Israelis. And then the United Nations